Namaste,
Okay.
Namaste and greetings. I'm
Joined.
Gupta Bhardwaj, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Learning. Today we are gathered here for day 14 of Law and Public Policy Youth Fellowship, a 2-month online immersive legal awareness and action research certificate training course and internship program. This program is organized by the IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. The chair for the program is Professor Vibhuti Patel, visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI, and the fellowship lead advisor and expert legal hands-on sessions is Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, visiting senior fellow IMPRI. The distinguished experts include Shri Sandeep Chachra, Professor Vibhuti Patel, Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, Advocate Dr. Vahida Nainar, Professor Mukul Ashar, Professor Uday Shankar, Shri Udit Mishra, Dr. Nivedita P. Haran, Shri Bhartendra Singh Baswan, Dr. Purnima Chauhan, Advocate Dr. Albertina Almeida, Dr. Gladstone Xavier, Professor Aruna Roy, Advocate Audrey de Mello, Dr. Kaustav K. Bandyopadhyay, Advocate Mrinalini Deshmukh, Professor Sharmila Ghuge, Advocate Flavia Agnes, Dr. Rashmi Singh, Mr. Debaditya Sinha, Professor Swaran Singh, Advocate Lara Jesani, Professor Anil K. Gupta, Justice Ajit K. Singh, Mr. Himanshu Shekhar, Dr. Amar Jesani, Dr. Soumyadeep Chattopadhyay, Mr. Bilal Khan, Shri Rajiv Ranjan Singh, Shri Tikender Singh Panwar, Shri Shailesh Gandhi, Dr. Simi Mehta, Advocate Abdul Hafiz Gandhi, Professor Amita Singh, Dr. Ajay Gudavarti, Shri Amit Dubey, Professor Sanghamitra Acharya, Dr. Y. Suresh Reddy, Advocate Sanchita N, and Shri Surendranath Tripathi. The conveners for this course are Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI, Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, Visiting Senior Fellow, IMPRI, and Dr. Arjun Kumar, Director at IMPRI. I welcome you all to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for putting your time, energy, and efforts into truly understanding the vital and complex intricacies of legal and public policy frameworks. The course will enable the participants to comprehend the nuances and technicalities of legal and public policy paradigms and therefore acquire theoretical insights along with technical skills to conduct research. We have also shared the course outline and reading resources document in your email for your kind perusal. We will be providing videos of each session for flexible learning at your place and pace. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules. It is imperative that you join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. Our session for day 14 will cover topics of the dilution of environmental policy with a special focus on environmental impact assessment process by Advocate Lara Jesani, environment disasters and sustainability by Professor Anil K. Gupta, interactive discussion session 4 by Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam. To start with the session, I would like to invite Professor Vibhuti Patel for her opening chair remarks.
Thank you, Nikita. And I would first of all like to thank Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, Dr. Shalu Nigam, Ms. Sweta Shankar, Ms. Vithita, and Mr. Satyam Tripathi and Nikita for putting this course together. Such a long drawn course. Today we are on the 5th week and 13th day. I welcome Advocate Lara Jesani and Professor Anil K. Gupta and the esteemed participants for this National Summer School program. A brief outline of the overall course for you for the recap. That first of all, we started with the introduction to law and public policy, the relationship of law and public policy, what are the measures taken by the state and non-state actors, the role of social movement, and also the judicial activism that we discussed, public interest litigation, the question of land rights, forest rights, right to food, right to education, they were also being discussed, and the grassroots level experiences were also discussed by Dr. Aruna Roy and Dr. Nikhil Day. Today, their article is there in Indian Express edit page. And on the 5th week, like we had a discussion of early, on the 4th week, we had a discussion, very lively discussion on Goa Children's Act and also Uniform Civil Code, which has been debated hotly in current context. And the previous session where we environment law and public policy and foreign policy were discussed, and Dr. Shalu Nigam also gave a very detailed case study of Bhopal gas tragedy and its learning. Dr. Debaditya Sinha, he provided vivid profile of roller coaster ride on evolution and development of environmental law. He termed it as a need-based law and anthropocentric and pragmatic laws that we have on environment. He acknowledged the role of social movement for environmental justice. He observed that environmental laws are made to protect industry, and he explained guiding principles of environmental regulation while dealing with pollution of water bodies, air pollution, and salination of land. While reflecting on sustainable development discourse, he averred that government is a trustee of natural resources to keep them safe, and he was critical of policy of pay and pollute, which is adopted by most of the nation states. He gave a profile of litigation on National Green Tribunal under Section 14, 15, and 16 on issues related to environmental clearance, declaration of eco-sensitive zones, and compensation for environmental damage. While narrating evolution of environmental laws, he mentioned 26 principles of Stockholm Declaration. He mentioned salient features of Wildlife Protection Act, Environmental Clearance Act, Kyoto Protocol 1997, Rio Declaration 1992, and he criticized of all talk and no work that happens in COPs and global gatherings of the for the SDGs. He informed the environmental law in India are of three types: common laws based on customs and judicial precedents, civil law passed by the legislature, and criminal law that come under the purview of maintenance of law and order. And he mentioned salient features of Environmental Protection Act that came after Bhopal gas tragedy, forest laws, series of amendments that we had in Water Act policy. He concluded with the statement that there is a poor system of grievance redressal when it comes to environmental disputes. Professor Swaran Singh gave a lot of food for thought in his lecture on foreign policy in a world that is deeply interconnected due to technology, and as a result, old notion of nation state and the boundaries have blurred. People of different nations are sharing information, talking on social, political, economic, and cultural issues, and people are connected because of businesses also. Hence, every important ministry in the country has a foreign policy. And he analyzed determinants of foreign policies as leverages and leadership. And while talking about aims and objectives of foreign policy, he referred to ancient civilizational wisdom of unity in diversity and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. He mentioned legacy of Gandhian values of peaceful methods adopted by the freedom movement in India to throw out British colonial rule. And he also stated that non-violence is in India's DNA. Foreign policy, he said, he concluded by saying that foreign policy cannot be black and white. It has to be nuanced. And he concluded with a statement that terror and talks cannot go together. Terrorism is a global problem, and terrorists have no religion. Their religion is only one, which is destruction and killing. The last presentation by Dr. Shalu Nigam was extremely vivid discussion with the learnings of Bhopal gas tragedy. She gave a minutest details of the way tragedy happened, the human miseries it caused, international jurisprudence, and the local Indian judicial system, how did it react. And despite central government's efforts in the United States to extradite Anderson, which did not happen, and Anderson died in 2014 without even appearing in the court of law. And currently how the NGOs and the civil society organizations like Sadbhavna Trust Clinic and Bhopal People's Health and Documentation Clinic, which is a charitable trust run by the group of doctors, scientists, writers, and social workers who are providing support, both in terms of mental health and also the medical clinical support to the victims of the Bhopal gas tragedy. Dr. Shalu concluded by stating neoliberal policy of liberalization, privatization, and globalization that continues to repeat such tragedies. And she also gave in a chronological order, she gave so many many such environmental disasters and the tragedies that have happened both in India and all over the globe. Now, for today, we are going to have again further very interesting discussion on the same topic of dilution of environmental policy with a special focus on environmental impact assessment process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next up, we have Advocate Lara Jesani, who will be taking up the session on the topic, the dilution of environmental policy with a special focus on the environmental impact assessment process. Advocate Lara Jesani is an independent law practice professional based in Mumbai and a human rights activist and member at People's Union for Civil Liberties. Welcome, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And sorry, I'm actually joining in from Kathmandu, where I'm here for a conference. So in case there is any disturbance, please let me know. I have 2 modes of internet and I can switch immediately. I will be talking on environment policy dilutions in the context of the environment impact assessment law. I have a presentation. Can I screen share? Is it possible to give me rights to screen share the presentation? Meanwhile, just to give a brief introduction about me, I'm a lawyer. I practice in the Bombay High Court, and I take on of environmental violations, also representing community and civil society organizations that are fighting against big projects. I'm also working on I work on several infrastructure development projects in cases helping communities who are displaced or who are facing the adverse impacts of such kind of projects. That's the focus area. And in the work that I do, or the litigations I do, environment impact assessment laws play an extremely important role. So I'll also share some of the learnings and case studies from that. Do I have the access? Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Are you able to share?
Yes. I'm just trying to find the screen. Yeah. Are you able to see the presentation?
We can see it. You can go full screen. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So we will be discussing more about the environment policy dilutions in the context of the environmental impact assessment process. Now, I heard from Dr. Patel, who is the convener, that you all have already looked at the environmental governance in our country. Also looked at some aspects of how the policies have shaped up. But I'll just give a very short overview because just to arrive at where we are going to start our discussion from. As you know, the Supreme Court initially recognized the right to healthy environment as an integral part of Article 21. Our Constitution did not originally have a right to protect the environment, and it was not given as a fundamental right, but it was seen to be part of Article 21. The whole debate internationally on bringing in environmental protections can be said to have started like a crucial starting point. There were conversations taking place before that, and many which happened after that, but it started from the Stockholm Conference. Now, one very important perspective that we should have is that in 1972, when the Stockholm Conference happened, at that point of time, the world had suffered 2 very disastrous wars and had started an industrial revolution in order to deal with the economic crisis and the impacts of those 2 wars, which displaced many people. There was loss of property. The economy of several countries was, in danger. There were depressions that were taking place, economic depressions. There were no jobs. So in this context, there was a lot of development that took place without keeping in mind the environmental safeguards or the impact that such kind of a development could have on communities as well as on wildlife as well as on the environment. So the Stockholm Conference was one very important point which kickstarted environmental regimes in various countries, including ours. Some principal laws that we have today, like the Wildlife Protection Act, Water Act, Forest Conservation Act, Air Pollution Act, Environment Protection Act, which is our umbrella law, all came, after this. In 1976, a very crucial development took place, which was the amendment to the Indian Constitution. I'm sure you'll have already gone through this. Article 48A created an obligation on the part of the state to protect the environment, and 51AG created a duty, a fundamental duty on every citizen's part to protect and improve the natural environment. Following this in 1992, of course, there were many, many things on environment taking place around this time, but I'm just going on the very crucial ones. In 1992, there was a very important conference, which is known as the Earth Summit, and which resulted in the Rio Declaration. Some very important principles that we use today, actually came out of many conversations around this time, including the precautionary principle, okay, which says that you don't have to wait for environmental damage to take place, but you must arrest the damage. So that is a very important principle. Second, which is a polluters pay principle, which actually said that, which put a strict liability on the polluters to pay for the damage that they have done to the environment, right? So these very important principles actually came around this time. And this there was a very important document that came, which was the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, which was ratified by 197 countries. And it was again strengthened in 1997. In India, following the 92 Earth Summit, in 1994, we first got our Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 1994. Now, this brought in very important, principles, which were of, prior environmental clearance for certain kinds of projects that have a very high impact, and it provided the thresholds, of those projects. Now, it's a very important development that took place in 1994. And before 1994, the permissions that used to take place were taking place as an administrative process, but there was no law which required, projects to actually go and do an entire environment impact assessment process. And there was no body which was formed in order to do that, no experts together which would actually look at a project before it was constructed, before it was, it was started, to look at what is the impact of this project. What will this project do? Like, for instance, you are living in a locality and somebody comes up with an industry over there, right? And they raise down the trees, they raise down the garden or whatever there is, raise down people's homes and build an industry over there, right? Now, before they even plan to do that, or on the basis of that plan, okay, you're required to go to the appropriate ministry or the appropriate committee, and which will actually look into that plan, which will see what is the impact of this. One, what is the impact of this on the environment that existed before that, or the people's rights that are getting affected because of this, right? The second that they will look at is, what is the pollution that this industry will cause? What is the impact that this industry will cause? Third is, can these negative things, can it be mitigated? Can it be in some way reduced? Can it in some way be ensured that they don't have these negative costs? So can we put in some measures, okay, in order to ensure that, nobody is adversely affected on account of this project? And fourth is, what is the value of this project? These things are extremely important questions that arise. And that is what the environment impact assessment process is supposed to ensure. Now, we got that law only in 1994 by way of the Environment Impact Assessment Notification. Some other very important laws that, we got following this, of course, was in 2005, we got the Right to Information Act. Now, as a lawyer, I can tell you that Right to Information Act is one of the biggest tools that has come in the hands of environmentalists. In fact, if we see the manner in which environmental, jurisprudence has developed post the Right to Information Act, we will know that many issues of impact of, the adverse impacts of the projects, of the, permissions, of the lacuna in the approvals, all have come because of the Right to Information Act, including of processes like public consultation processes, because earlier this information was just not available. Now, if there is a company which is coming up with an industry, okay, who will have the information regarding the project? I know we can't have an interactive session here because, this is an online format, but even if we think very, at a very basic level, we know the person who will have the information is the company. The second person who can have the information is the government, right? Government, because the company will have to provide this information to the government in order to get necessary permissions and approvals to construct that project, right? So this information the company will never give, because they don't want anybody, they are only concerned with their profit. They don't want anybody to come and create any obstacles in their project. So they will try their level best to not give it, unless the law requires them to give it, which is what environment impact assessment notification, as we will see, also provides for, that certain information is required to be given. Certain information, of course, it does not talk about. The second thing which is there is that if we are not going to get it from the company, we have to go to the government. Now, what was available to us, if we wanted information from the government, what was the law that provided us the right to do that? While we all know that in order to be part of a democracy, we need to have information, we need to be actively participating in all decisions that are taking place. Does it actually happen? So Right to Information Act actually crystallized those rights for us. It gave us provisions in law which we could use in order to go and access information. So where the company was not giving information about any kind of industry that is coming up, or any kind of project that is coming up, or any kind of infrastructure that is being set up, we could go to the government and get that information under the Right to Information Act. Now, a lot of environmentalist communities have used the provisions of the Right to Information Act in order to secure information on the basis of which they have realized that, okay, now this is not being done. This process was wrongly done. This public hearing, they gave wrong information. This document they have not supplied, or this document they have supplied and it has all these wrong considerations. And on the basis of that, they approach lawyers and then they go to court and they challenge the project, or they write to the ministry, or they do lobbying with the politicians, or whatever it is that they can do in order to ensure that the negative impacts of the project do not affect the community. So this is a very important tool that came in 2005. And it is very crucial in the international environmental jurisprudence place. The first thing that is extremely crucial, the first right, is access to information. Because you cannot do any kind of environmental activism or work without having access to information. The second important development that also took place was that the earlier 94 notification on environment impact assessment, was superseded by the environmental impact assessment notification of 2006, which was more, well-defined, which provided for right to information, which gave in, prohibitions, restrictions on projects and activities. And following this, in 2010 came the National Green Tribunal Act, which set up green courts. There was an earlier attempt also to set up green courts, which we'll not get into. But the National Green Tribunals that we see today were set up under the 2010 National Green Tribunal Act, which was brought in specially to adjudicate environmental disputes. It was felt that we need a separate forum which will only, in a focused way, look at environmental disputes and ensure that there is no delay, ensure that there is speedy justice, and ensure that no violations take place, because the damage to the environment is taking place at a very accelerated rate. And so internationally, it was thought that we need to have green courts. Now, also in 2011, following this, came a very important law called the Coastal Regulation Zone Notification, which is on the same lines as the Environment Impact Assessment Notification, which is why I'm also talking about including it over here. There are many other environmental laws. I'm not getting into that. These are the laws which are very connected to the EIA, which is why I feel they're very important for us to know about them. The Coastal Regulation Zone Notification also talks about environment impact of those projects in the coastal zone. Then is finally the Land Acquisition Act 2013. Now, for many of these projects to take place where an EIA is required to be done, where social impact assessment is required to be done, land is required. Land which belongs to farmers, land which belongs to the forest land, which belongs to Adivasi community, which belongs to fisher folk. All of these lands are required to be acquired by the government, and this takes place under the Land Acquisition Act. And 2013 Land Acquisition Act was a big departure from the old Land Acquisition Act, because it provided for market rate compensation, and it also brought in certain protections that were not available in the earlier acts. Of course, I must say here, and I must caveat here very specially, that there are many, many protections that as human rights activists, as human rights lawyers, we have been asking for, which is still not there in many of these laws. But these were important laws and important, advancements that were made to the environmental governance. In 2015, India ratified the Paris Agreement, which, with the promise to limit global temperature increase this century well below 2 degrees and preferably to 1.5 degrees. And this was to be done by reducing carbon emissions. Also, as a part of SDGs, under SDG 13, India, as well as all countries in the world, are required to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts, and reducing climate, carbon emissions and all are extremely important in that context. Now, I'm just giving you this overview so that, one understands that, there are a lot of, promises that we have made internationally, as well as a lot of laws that we've come up with at a domestic level, but which are in order to address the negative climate change impacts, which are to address the urgent situation of the environment that we have right now. And then we'll come to why this dilution then is so stark. Also, India also brought in 2014-18 the concept of corporate environmental responsibility on the same lines as the CSR concepts. And even that, is a very problematic, area that was brought in. It was brought in through an office memorandum. And this was one of the, issues on whether it will be an additional, money that will be given in order to improve the environment, or whether it will be a part of the, CSR, because the CSR already has a component that is mandated that businesses need to invest. So again, these kinds of, OMs had come in and they were later on scrapped. They have now been replaced by other kinds of, ORs. Now coming to why, what is the approach that we look at when we talk about environmental rights? Now, the approach that we have to look at as far as environmental rights is concerned is a rights-based approach. And we cannot advocate for environment rights or seek any protections of the law, okay, if we do not have certain, important criteria that are followed in the environment impact process or in the delivery of these rights to the people. Now, first and most important, like I said, is access to information. In a rights-based approach, the first thing that anybody, all of us as citizens, anybody as a community needs is information. So that is first is the right to access to information. It has to be there in our environmental jurisprudence. The second thing that needs to be there is the participation in decision-making process. Now, this is an extremely important point, because if we as people do not get to participate in the decision-making process for each and every project, and I mean it for every project, okay, the government that we have, that we have elected, all right, is not going to protect us in respect of our individual rights in each of these projects. And I'm very responsible when I say this. Okay, we elect a government once in 5 years. The government comes in over there. It has its own economic interests and own things that it needs to do, all right, and it comes up with these laws which are supposed to aid us. However, as we are seeing of late, many of these laws do not practically aid us, right? And so it is extreme. Our voices, even if they are representatives, do not reach. They do not make any dent in the decision-making process. So it is extremely important that there is public participation in the decision-making process, especially when it is related to human rights and the environment. Because these areas, these are irreparable damages that take place, especially to the environment. Today, we are at a very critical stage. And if we do not have our voice in the decision-making process, the decisions that will be made against the environment. So participation in decision-making process is extremely important in the rights-based approach. The third important thing is due diligence and impact assessment, both social and environmental. So what is impact assessment? Now, the entire impact assessment is based on, like I said, understanding what the project is, looking at the project plan, and trying to arrive at what are the adverse impacts of this project. Can they be mitigated? Should this project even take place? Okay, are the costs of this project, okay, to the society far more? All right, are the impacts far more than the goods of this project? These factors need to be looked at. And who can look at these factors? Environmental experts, people who are invested and who understand the impacts of these projects. They are the ones who will have to look at it. So due diligence and impact assessment is an extremely important part. Due diligence also looks at, the track record of people who are executing this project, right? Whether are they doing it in a clean way? Have they done it in a clean way before, right? This is also an extremely important part of the due diligence process. The fourth important point is access to justice. We know that in spite of everything, projects get passed. Projects get passed even if they are bad. In such a situation, do we have access to justice? Can we remedy this? Can we go to court and say that they are violating our rights, and so this should not be allowed? Please scrap the clearance, right? So this is an extremely important thing. Second thing is preventive. At a preventive level, when we know that this project is going to create a problem, but still the authorities are passing the project, can we go to court and say, prevent this project from taking place, right? So that is a preventive relief that we want, because we know that if the project takes place, it's going to be a disaster. And compensatory, okay, and reparatory measures. Now, compensatory and reparatory measures require that those who are affected by the project, first is the damage should be stopped. That is extremely important. When we talk about remedial measures, we are talking about damage stopping. And for the damage that has already been done, okay, there should be compensation, right? And the environment that has been damaged should be repaired. So reparation. So these are extremely important parts that we need in access to justice. And finally, we have to defend the democratic spaces and protect the environmental defenders. Now, today, anybody who tries to fight against big projects or fight against the government, we're seeing that the democratic space to do this itself has shrunk. We are unable to, feel safe while we go and, raise these important points or oppose big projects, even though we know that we are actually doing it for the environment. Like, for instance, people going and standing on a promenade, okay, saying that save the earth. What are they doing? They are trying to protect the environment. But still, there is a fear that if you go with a poster saying save the earth, you may be arrested. So you will not be able to raise environmental rights unless we stand with those who are raising the environmental rights. Unless we all come together and we say that no, protecting environmental rights is also our fundamental right. And hence, we need to defend those democratic spaces and protect the environmental defenders who are doing it. Now, the environment impact assessment under Indian law has actually 4 stages. One is the screening of applications, which takes place, called the first stage, where applications that have been received in respect of any kind of project have to be gone through by the appraisal committee, and they are supposed to look into the what are the various what is the various plan, what is the project area, what is the impact that this will have. What are the kind of materials that are being used for construction? All of these various things have to be looked into by the appraisal committee. Okay, and after scoping these applications, they're supposed to determine what is known as the TOR, or the terms of reference, which address all environmental concerns for the preparation of the EIA report, the Environmental Impact Assessment Report. Okay, and after that, there is a stage of public consultation, where this EIA report is supposed to be presented before those people who are affected, okay, by this project, what we call as the project affected communities. Now, once they go to the project affected communities or project affected persons, this report has to be provided to them in their local language. Otherwise, how will they read the report if you have big reports? Or at least an executive summary needs to be provided in a local language. Once they go through this, a public hearing needs to be held, okay, where the public is consulted on what are the various concerns that they have about the project. Environmental experts and other stakeholders are also required to be part of this process so that they can point out what are the harms that will take place because of this project. And a report is drawn on this public consultation that takes place, which is again presented before the committee, and the committee is required to address the various concerns and see now if this project is actually a good project or a bad project. So they are using their own expert knowledge, and they're also required to use the community knowledge in order to come at a decision on whether this project should take place or not. The final stage is the appraisal stage, where there is detailed scrutiny by the appraisal committee of the EIA report and the outcome of the public consultations. And they're supposed to give a decision on whether they approve this project or they don't approve this project, whether they require additional details or whether they don't require this additional details. whether this project, is can be allowed, or there are more details that are to be taken, or whether it should be rejected. Now, this is the decision that they have to take place on appraisal. Now, this is a very important process that we have over here in place, the environment impact assessment process. Now, I've already put forth to you all what are the various laws, what is the understanding behind these laws, what is the environment impact assessment process. Now, let's come to what situation we are in today. Okay, India has been ranked the last in the world out of 180 countries on the Global Environmental Performance Index. We have the highest levels today, okay, of the worst environmental performance is, as compared to all the countries in the world which are being assessed, okay, the worst, it is the last, and we have very high levels of pollution. More than 250 countries are the highest polluted countries. We have, huge amount of health impact. In fact, one of the reasons why our environmental performance index is low, okay, is also because of the fact that the health impacts are extremely high. As per, the Lancet report, 12, which the government disputed. I'm sure you all must have seen it in the papers. 12.5% of people are dying in the country on account of environmental factors, right? It's some way or the other, their deaths are linked to the environment, right? We are a country which is not only facing impact of pollution, but we are also facing the impact of disasters. So we are also facing climate change impacts. All right. We are also facing, issues of, of unclean, unsafe water. We are facing, issues of, destruction of several of our land pockets, coastal areas. So we are talking about, we are being impacted in many, many different ways due to environmental factors. So for us as a country, okay, environment should be the focus of all our legislation. Protecting the environment has become the most critical area of legislation in our country, right? At the same time, if you see, as far as businesses are concerned, okay, India jumped double its rate, okay, to 63rd position in 2020 in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business ranking. Since then, World Bank is not coming up with these rankings. There were lots of disputes that were raised around these rankings. But India jumped double its rate, means it actually came up so quickly, okay, in a matter of few years in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business ranking from 2016 to 2020. The major, attributing factor to this jump was the deregulation and the easy clearances that were being granted to projects. This is something that has been attributed officially. That it is because the companies were facing obstacles getting clearances, and this process was made easier with single window clearances, or it was deregulated, that they managed to jump. Now, what does this show? The laws which we have spoken about before this, which are for the protection of the environment, okay, have been slowly and systematically whittled down in order to allow companies, in order to state to go ahead doing all kinds of development projects, which according to me are not even development. Because what is development today? If the development today does not protect us, does not protect the environment, how can we call it development? This kind of bad or destructive development projects have been supported and have been allowed by whittling down the protections that were there in the land laws and environment laws and forest laws and in several other laws, which ensured that development can only take place if it fulfills certain kinds of criteria. If it safeguards the environment, it safeguards the rights of the people. So what are we staring at today? We are staring at an environmental crisis. We have increasing pollution. There's land grab taking place for infrastructure, industrial and commercial projects. Forest diversion and encroachment, which has taken place, I mean, is just unbelievably extensive. Instead, what is happening is the forest laws are being amended in order to expand the definition of forest. So today, plantations can be called as forests, right? But what are the actual natural forests which have existed for centuries are being destroyed for projects, right? There's extensive mining, destruction of natural resources, and these fossil fuels and these, coal, etc., which are being mined are non-renewable. They are never going to come back. And we should be right now doing a shift to renewable energies, not just doing it in a corporatized manner, but to do it in a, at a community level, to do it in an individualized manner as well. Okay, but instead, there has been increase in mining. In fact, private mining and all of them have been encouraged. There has been an increase in mining, as well as increase in the destruction of natural resources. There's loss of traditional livelihood, fishing, farming, forest dwelling communities, Adivasis, who have all been dependent on traditional livelihood, are in a very critical situation. There is water crisis, there is increasing food insecurity, which we have seen. Because of the destructive infrastructure and development projects, there has been a huge amount of pollution, a huge amount of various negative impacts that have come with these destructions. And there are a lot of several other problems that we are facing because of this. Now, what we have seen as far as the environmental impact assessment notification is concerned is that for the last several years now, for at least 8 to 9 years, there has been a series of amendments that have been brought in to the Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2006, which was originally supposed to be a strong legislation that had been brought in, not perfect, but at least a strong legislation brought in to ensure that there was environment impact assessment of all the projects and activities that were proposed by companies or by the state or by individuals, to ensure that there are no adverse impacts of these projects. But in the last decade, we have seen that there has been a deliberate weakening of this law.
Ma'am,
yes.
Ma'am, we are running out of time, so could you please wrap it up?
Okay, can I get 5 minutes, or is that yeah? So there have been huge amounts of relaxations that have been brought in favor of polluting sectors and industries, including the thermal power, mineral benefaction, coal mining, chemical fertilizer industry, highway and infrastructure projects, building construction projects. Now, these are the various industries that are actually covered under the EIA notification of 2006, but there have been different dilutions that have been brought on. One very important dilution that has been brought out is by bypassing the public consultation process. Like I said, public consultation is an extremely important stage of the environment clearance process, because it is only in this that the concerns of the community are actually relayed, okay, to those who are making a decision on whether this project should take place or not. The third thing that was brought in was by way of single window clearances. Earlier, if you had to take a clearance, you had to go to different departments in order to take clearances from different departments. Like, for instance, if you have to take a forest approval, you go to the forest ministry. If you have to take an environmental approval, you go to the environment ministry, and so forth. But they brought in the process of single window clearances, thereby easing up the entire clearance process and the stages of the clearance. And this is an extremely detrimental thing as far as we look at the protections. Although it has eased it up very easily for the corporates, it has not worked in favor of the environment. Another very important modification that was brought in was by increasing the validity of environmental clearance. Now, when we look at the situation of the environment right now, we see that the environment situation is getting worse. We are the last now in the world, right? So, and technology, on the other hand, has become much, much better. So actually, the validity of environmental clearances should decrease. Validity of environmental clearance means the period when the person is supposed to execute the project, to construct the project after they get the clearance. So earlier they would have 5 years. This was increased to 7 years with a further renewal of 3 years, making it extremely easy. So some industries have actually benefited from this provision because it literally means for them as an administrative thing that they get a 10-year clearance. Okay, then they brought in, by way of notification, they brought in a window period in which all those projects which had violated, who had not taken prior environmental clearance, could get post facto clearances. They could get clearances in spite of the fact that they had not taken clearance before starting the project. And this window was provided by bringing in notifications in the under the EIA notification of 2006, and with a view to regularize their violating projects and activities. So they pay some amount of money and they regularize it. Now, generally, if a company has gone and done something illegal, like started a factory without taking a clearance, what would we expect? We would expect that the factory be shut down, because obviously it has not taken its clearances. But by bringing in the entire thing of post facto clearances, this is an opportunity was given to all these companies to regularize themselves. There are also several relaxations in EIA criteria and procedure that were brought in. I have given you all 2 papers as study material, which has each of these, various dilutions that were brought in. They have details of each of these dilutions, including like which clause, under which clause several of these dilutions are brought in, under which notification several of these dilutions are brought in. Now, so you can always go through that for the details, because you won't be able to go through each one of them. Also, an attempt was made during COVID in March 2020 to change this environment impact assessment notification by bringing in the draft environment impact notification of 2020. Now, this notification is a complete departure from the EIA notification of 2006. It allows now, as a matter of fact, like earlier, there was an amendment brought in just for a single window. But over here, it allows, as a matter of fact, post facto clearances. It allows for private consultants to be engaged. 40 different types of industries were actually exempted from prior environmental clearance altogether. Okay, so there are various dilutions that were brought in. Public hearing time was reduced. Okay, public consultation requirement was removed for several projects. The whole bypass that I was talking about. So this was very strongly resisted by the people, and more and close to about 2 million, 1.7 million, that is close to 20 lakh objections were received by the ministry. And right now it has been kept in abeyance. It has not been removed altogether, but it is something that is looming as a threat. At least it has not come into force till date. And it is very important for all of us and all of you, in fact, to keep a watch on this law, to make sure that we don't allow it to come. Now, I have other parts of the presentation, but I won't go into that, so that if there is a possibility of taking some questions, we can take them. But these are some of the impacts that have taken place that I was talking about. Like, for instance, in the peak of 2020, there were several, April 2020, during the lockdown, several projects were arbitrarily cleared by the Environmental Appraisal Committee, which is supposed to do the environment impact assessment process. No additional information was in fact called. One very critical issue that you see with, this one which I'm showing is of the Molem project, where there were 3 projects together that were, to be brought in, 3 linear infrastructure projects. One was the 4-laning of the highway, the double tracking of the railway, and transmission line. These 3 were to be brought in together as a part of a project, and they all were actually sanctioned during the peak of the lockdown. And a huge tract of land was razed down without permissions, without even having tree cutting permissions. So these kinds of things, in fact, took place in COVID at a very critical time when people could not object to it and could not protest. But people still came down and protested it, and for a period at least, the projects were put on hold. And then the matter was referred to the Supreme Court, to the CEC. And the committee over there, gave its assessment of these projects. But these kinds of actions have actually, taken place. For us, it is extremely important to be watchful of all of them, because there has been massive amounts of dilutions in law, which the corporates as well as the state are using in order to push for these kinds of projects. Now, one very important thing finally that I wanted to say is that the work that we are doing in terms of environmental rights, and all of us should be doing, even as ordinary citizens, okay, it can only be done if we have a space to be able to raise these grievances. Now, the national green tribunals, for more than 3.5 years, the zonal benches were closed down. So even where there was a violation of the EIA notification of 2006, it was very difficult for communities and affected people to go to court and actually raise their grievances, because the national green tribunals had been rendered ineffectual by not appointing any members. Similarly, even the judiciary has not been keenly taking up the environmental cases, because they believe that the national green tribunals should take the cases, because there is a separate environmental court for it, but the environmental court is not doing its job. Okay. Also, another thing that is taking place is the Right to Information Act, which I said is an extremely important tool for environmentalists as well as for lawyers, is also being targeted. So there is a rendering of the Right to Information Act as ineffectual. There was in fact an entire move to dilute the Right to Information Act also, so. But that luckily was resisted in the parliament. But there has still been a dilution in effect which is taking place. So there is one way that they do it is by diluting the law itself or by changing the law itself. The second way that it is being done is by ensuring that the law is no longer effective, that implementation of that law is not possible. So we have to look at both of these things. And of course, one which is very important is that we need to keep voicing our opinion, because it is only then that we will be able to make any kind of change. I will leave this presentation behind, so don't worry, you all can go through the slides. And definitely, of course, if you all have any questions, you all can come back to me. This is my email address.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your enlightening insights. Your expertise and knowledge have truly broadened our understanding in this area. Now, I request the chair, Professor Vibhuti, ma'am, to share her remarks.
Thank you, Advocate Lara Jesani, for bringing such a nuanced analysis of dilution of the law. And I think so many important things. I wish you could also discuss some of the best practices and how the people's involvement in the social movement have been able to achieve the demands of their demands for environmental safety. I think that would also have been very enlightening. Some of the case studies, if we could have discussed, but I think we are short of time. So, and Professor Anil Gupta has already joined. So I think some other time. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With the chair's permission, we would like to move on to our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, are there any questions, or is that all right? Or can we?
You can answer them in chat box also.
Okay.
Currently, there are no questions. Yeah.
Okay.
I will also share with them with you, ma'am, if any arises.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Moving forward, we have Professor Anil K. Gupta, who will be taking a session on the topic Environment, Disasters and Sustainability. Professor Anil K. Gupta is the Head of Division, International Cooperation, Advisory Services, E-Learning and Media Portfolio and Director of Projects and COE, Full Professor of Policy Planning and Strategies at National Institute of Disaster Management based in New Delhi. Welcome, sir, and over to you.
So thank you, Nikita, and the entire team of IMPRI. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So Dr. Arjun and all other colleagues of IMPRI team. IMPRI is taking one by one very strategically important initiatives, and I find this certification program is very, very useful. In fact, I was listening to the previous speaker who was making a critical analysis of I would say that what is going about in the domain of environmental legislations. Now, I have a background of environment and law, so a twin background, as my introduction also referred to, and I work in the area of disaster risk reduction, adaptation and sustainability. On some fronts, we find that these things are being discussed and dealt separately in isolation, sometimes by different departments. But there are occasions we find that there are a lot of interdisciplinarity, and a lot of departments are required to play their roles. And the same way, different subject domains experts are also contributing to these areas. So I consider that this is a very important nexus that we have to discuss about. And talking about disasters, the climate challenges and the sustainability related challenges in isolation probably has a lot of limitations. So better we start looking at some kind of a integrated understanding and integrated approach to addressing that. So I'll be sharing a PowerPoint presentation also to help organize my thoughts in a better way. So sharing my screen here. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Thank you. I'll
So you
make
can
it
go full screen.
Yes.
Yes.
full screen दिख रहा है अभी?
Ah, sir. Bilkul. Perfect. Please.
Thank you. So I have some examples and some conceptual aspects that I would be discussing here. And I'm sure that the participants are from diverse background, but they have good level of understanding and knowledge. They are very active, though many of them are young fellows. So they are also now, in fact, we have a vibrant young generation now who are very active in thinking process as well as in looking at that how the humanities future basically we look at it. And I have written here a nexus approach to resilience and sustainability because I highly advocate that we have to look at through an integrated lens, our integrated approach. So I found this very interesting picture which tells about some kind of a relationship between our exploitation of natural resources. So on the other right side, we see that on the x-axis, it is the ecological footprint that we have. So ecological footprint is like the natural resources that we consume per person per capita. And then on the other side, we see the happiness score. And very interestingly, the countries that we consider that they have a very good quality of the standard of better standard of living, better happiness score also that we usually consider the kind of parameters that we take. We also find that many of those countries are also on high ecological footprint. It means in order to attain happiness, in order to attain development, we have to exploit the ecological resources. So this also presents a kind of a dichotomy, because if we recall the COVID period where we were asking everyone to wash your hands 20 times in a day, every time 20 seconds. But on the other hand, our groundwater board or other various organizations working in the area of water, they show you a map with areas of criticality where the groundwater has depleted to a great extent, and many places where the water is available but it is not fit for use. So different kind of criticalities about water. So on one hand, we need more and more natural resources to exploit so that we consider ourselves developed and we attain a level of happiness. But on the other hand, there are the challenges of availability and quality of these natural resources. So basically, we have to live with this kind of a dichotomy, but not only we have to live, but we have to progress. Why we have to progress? Because we have already said earlier we had Millennium Development Goal, and now we have Sustainable Development Goal. There is a transition. MDG, we were talking more of physical growth, the supplies, the welfare issues. But SDG, that is a transition that is talking about that everything we do in a sustainable manner, so that the developmental achievements sustain over time. So those should not be short-lived attainments. But talking is easy, doing is not that easy. And that has been reflected by the previous speaker when she was analyzing the laws also. Because on one hand, we are under the social pressure, we are under the economic pressure, we are under the political aspirations pressure also for developmental wants. So if we are ask people want highways, people want airports, people want various kind of systems, various kind of infrastructure. But on the other hand, we say that in order to develop these, is to some extent the ecological systems are compromised. So this is the way when we look at these two dimensions, we also when we look at these, that major developmental projects, their ecological implications, some or other way also contribute to disaster related vulnerabilities and the hazards also. How that process takes place, I'll be discussing with that also. Now, my second argument, in order to support what I have been discussing, that the previous discourses, if we look at the 1990s and even the previous one, 1980s, we used to say that the next war will be around water. Yes, I do not say that it is untrue or true, but I say that a bigger challenge is now emerging, that is about land. Why? Because land is becoming a limiting factor. And that is the reason we are eyeing at moon, we are eyeing at Mars, we are eyeing at the space colonies, because now we are talking about the hydrogen based energy system. So when we will be burning hydrogen, we will be getting water also. So it will be some kind of a noospheric system where everything will be governed by technology. By technology, we will be able to manufacture water also. How sustainable? What are the challenges? Those are the additional questions. But yes, water we can manufacture, but land we cannot manufacture. So that is something. We cannot synthesize land, we cannot manufacture land, but we want more and more land. Very interestingly, in 2019 July, India hosted the 14th Conference of Parties of UNCCD. Many of you must be remembering, it was UNCCD is United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification. And there are 2 or 3 main important discussion points were there. One was the Global Water Initiative. Second was Global Drought Initiative. And the third was that all the countries who were members, they jointly they agreed that we have to start developing an action plan and taking actions towards releasing land back to nature. Very interestingly and very surprising. In the time when everyone wants to grab more and more land, the people are in conflict that we want more land. Our land has limitations. We want new institutions. We have to we want to bring new airport, hospital, housing, so many things. But at the same time, we are deciding that we start giving land back to nature. How it is possible? But it is inevitable also. And why it is inevitable, that I will be discussing in the later part also. Because this conflict, the land and they conflict with other kind of aspects, and that is also resulting in the challenges of water. In fact, the deluge that we are seeing in almost half of the country these time, particularly the mountain areas, but not limited to mountain areas, but to the entire NCR and the nearby areas, Madhya Pradesh, Punjab, and some other parts of the country. We are seeing the deluge, we are seeing the widespread floods, and you all will agree that it has a direct implications of landscape changes and the land use related conflicts. In fact, this morning itself, I was discussing, and we were seeing the Delhi maps of Mughal periods and Delhi maps of 30 years back and Delhi map of now. And we were seeing that, in fact, most of the places which we say that Delhi got flooded, those were basically the river's own land. Those were basically the floodplains of Yamuna. And now we say that the Yamuna has encroached, but it is in reality, actually, Yamuna has not encroached. We have encroached Yamuna. Our Yamuna's floodplains, our Yamuna's riverbed and river. So basically, these kind of conflicts are now increasing day by day, and that is resulting on the water security as well. Because water is also a product of land. Because if we talk about the watershed approach, river basin approach, we all will agree that water is a product, and water is a product of watersheds. And when we understand the catchment dynamics and all that. So that is very important. And land is something that hosts ecosystems. So when we talk about most of the important ecosystems, it is the land that has these kind of ecosystems, except ocean. So in fact, ocean floor is also land. So land, and very interestingly, many times in revenue records or in revenue idea, the land is considered as a non-living entity. Land is not considered a living entity. Now we have started considering even river also a living entity, but land we do not consider. But if we really look at land, land is not a non-living entity like any other kind of non-living thing. Land has lot of dynamic aspects. And when it has bioproductivity, when it is supporting a lot of biodiversity, when it is supporting a wetland system, when it is supporting a biodiversity system, when it is supporting a food production system, when it's supporting the watershed services, a number of other services. When a land is supporting, it is supporting because it has a dynamic system. So we have to start doing a kind of a rethinking that land is not a non-living entity, but land as a dynamic system. And that is very important, and that brings land as a central thing. The third dimension which I will bring to discussion, that when we talk about disasters, our primary focus goes on search and rescue. But in reality, or in real understanding of disasters, this is a historical perspective. I think 30, 40 years back, disasters were being discussed, are being talked primarily in terms of the emergency situations or crisis situations and dealing with crisis. But gradually, it had a paradigm shift, and we started talking more about the risk mitigation as well as preparedness. But certainly about disaster, that how do we prepare for disasters? How do we prepare for just can I take a call? I'll just tell that I'll call later. Hello. हाँ जी. आप अभी एक मैं लेक्चर में हूँ कि मैं आधे घंटे में बात कर सकता हूँ, हाफ एन आवर में. जी 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 मैं आपको आई विल कॉल यू बैक आफ्टर हाफ एन आवर. जी जी. So basically, the approach earlier about disasters was response centric, talking about search and rescue, saving people's life, and providing some kind of relief. But then we moved to the next level of understanding, where though we were talking about disasters, but more of preparedness and risk mitigation. But very interestingly, with the understanding of climate change implications that are leading to extreme events, like the changes in heavy changes in precipitation patterns, bringing more heavy rainfall events, more also on the other hand, bringing dry spells, bringing more the wind storms, dust storms, cyclonic storms, the heat wave. These kind of things are also increasing. So now, in fact, we have started talking that the disaster risk reduction is a year-round activity. It is not limited only in the concern to a hazardous situation or a situation when we call it an emergency or a crisis situation. So basically, need not to talk about disaster even. So we have to talk about hazard, so that we visualize, we anticipate, and we develop a scenario of hazard. We also understand our weaknesses, and we also relate it with the environmental issues. So environmental issues, there are three types of environmental changes we talk about. One is the climate change, second is land use changes, and the third is natural resource degradation. So there are three types of environmental changes our world is witnessing, and India represents a true, I would say that, a representation of whatever happens in any part of the Asia Pacific. We have mountains, we have coasts, we have desert, we have floodplains, we have the cities with different level of challenges and diverse. We have industrial areas, and we have people which have much good facilities, but we have people who are still struggling for the basic facilities as well. There are a lot of people who are still to be provided with housing, a lot of people who are still to be provided with the good quality drinking water, health facilities, so many things. So we are in an economy in transition. So we have, on one hand, we have the excellent examples, good examples also, but there are pockets, there are the sections in society where there are a lot of challenges associated with causing vulnerabilities. And India is also basically one of the hotspots, the world's hotspots for impact of climate change. So basically, when we talk about vulnerability, there are two types of impact of climate change we talk in reference to vulnerability. One is that the climate change brings shock events, and it contributes towards higher level of the uncertainties. Like many times there are sudden changes, and India's geography also there are a lot of strong local influences in our climate system. Many times people have questions that people say that in other countries, more developed countries, smaller countries like Denmark and other small countries, people have much better weather forecasts and much accurate weather forecasts. Why India's weather forecast have a little lesser accuracy and there are uncertainties? One of the answers, I say one of the answers, but is very strong argument, is that we have a lot of local influences on our climatic system. So topography, soil moisture, the biodiversity of that particular area, the local emission level, the heat flux, these kind of things are also contributing a lot towards the weather modification at local level that takes place. And basically that makes a little level of uncertainty in our weather forecast also. So very interestingly, now the India, we have recently contributed the National Adaptation Communication to UNFCCC, the 2022, by end of 2022 only last year, just few months back. And basically, if we look at the approach that we talk about climate change adaptation is very much related with the two major aspects. That one is that anticipating the hazard. So rainfall and other things can lead to floods. When there is a very scanty rainfall or dry spells are there, that is a situation of drought. And so similarly, various other kind of extremes that can lead to disasters, including heat wave, also dust storm, heat wave, these kind of things also. But the climate change is also contributing towards reducing biodiversity and bioproductivity, also compromising ecological services. So by affecting ecological functions in structure, it is also making ecological services, so ecosystem services that we call. So there are several ecosystem services, like water is also an ecosystem service. The climate moderation is ecological service. We have the natural flood control that, for example, the wetlands are the natural flood control systems provided by the nature, by the God. So basically, and we all know that how fast wetlands have depleted over past 40 years time. The real estate, the housing, the kind of development have eaten up most of our wetlands, and whatever wetlands remained, their size has shrunken, and many of them have undergone a bad situations. In fact, we have seen the Chennai flood, direct relationship with depletion of the temple tanks and wetland areas, direct relationship in Bengaluru, and not only these places, even Delhi also we see that the wetlands, almost 80% of the wetlands in NCR Delhi region have vanished, have disappeared. And basically that has also contributed to aggravating flood situation. So there are direct and indirect linkages, I think. So the adaptation is very much a replica of what we talk about, the vulnerability risk reduction, or reducing vulnerabilities. So the vulnerability of ecosystems, vulnerability of society, vulnerability of systems, organizations to addressing the climatic shocks, climatic risk. And thus, when we talk about these things, the entire discourse becomes the environment centric. The things are around natural resources, ecosystems, the atmospheric systems, hydrospheric systems, the biodiversity, the things are around this. Even the Delhi flood, you might have seen in the media, the discourses were referring to wetlands, discourses were referring to the land use, discourses was referring to the cleaning of land, so the waste management issues. And basically now this discourse, when we are talking about disasters and disaster risk reduction with reference to environment as an implicit thing, so that is indirectly also touching upon the context of climate change, also a context of sustainability. But because sustainability is talking about the carbon neutrality, the green growth strategy, circular economy, and it is also talking about the green cities, like green buildings. It is also talking about the effective waste management. And sustainability also talks about the intergenerational equity, basically. So what we are going to inherit, give to our next generation, so that they inherit whether a better future or the future with cities under deluge, cities under this kind of challenges. So that basically this is a second generation of DRR thought process that we are in. So basically now we say that sustainability and environment inclusive disaster risk reduction. So that's very important. So how environmental issues we look at in disaster risk management? So environmental change as a risk driver, I already told that 3 major dimensions: climate change, land use, and natural resource degradation. But by affecting the people's natural resources, by affecting people's health, by affecting the people's food, nutrition, also direct exposure to heat, direct exposure to the extreme cold, these kind of things also bring behavioral the extremities in people, and bring even poverty, because when the people are the agriculture is affected, the people's orchard and plantations are affected, people's the occupations are affected, livelihood is affected, people become poor and poor. And then the poverty is one of the most recognized contributor to the vulnerability of the society, our community, and our economies to the impact of disasters. So this is very important thing. And 3 kind of relationship we see between environment and disaster. One is that environmental degradation can aggravate disaster risk. Second thing, that disasters also affect environment. So many times we talk that the environment degradation leads to disaster risk, increasing disaster risk, but we seldom talk that disasters are affecting environment. One example, when the cyclone Fani came, it broke in Chilka Lake into 3 parts, and now there were a lot of the initiatives were there to improve the situation. But see how it can affect your water bodies, how it can affect your trees. Thousands of trees also uprooted in any cyclone. Landslides also affects a lot of biodiversity, the soil hydrology, and so many things. So this way, any kind of disaster, whether it is an earthquake, whether it is a flood, whether it is a forest fire, whether it is a cyclone, these are affecting our ecosystems, their structure and productivity, their functions as well. But there has been very less research on this aspect, that how the ecosystems and ecological structure and functions were affected by disasters. Primarily, the focus of post-disaster damage assessment or impact assessment has been on economy and society, on infrastructure. So, but nature is also an infrastructure given by God. If we look at the economic value of services one wetland provides to us by flood control, by providing climate moderation in heat control, and several other things, for example, also moderating the impact of drought. So we will recognize, and also the value of the wetland, the watershed services. If we put economic value, we will understand that how much is the economic cost of these kind of things. And second, the third aspect is that when there is a disaster, the primary focus is on rescue, search and rescue. So the primary focus is in saving the life, and that is true also, because when there is a disaster, the primary focus has to be on saving life. Now we are also having the additional focus on saving the livelihood also, because the people's life is also dependent on their resources, livelihood resources, the natural resources, and the livestock contribute a major this thing to people's sustainable life, better life, good life. So that is also important. So, but when we have primary focus on saving life, the compromise is that environmental issues are many times not looked at. For example, if we have to create an alternative route, we won't think twice for cutting a forest. So I think that is also coming up, that many times if we dump the waste debris anywhere, in any low-lying area, any wetland, we do not think that how it is going to affect our hydrological system and going to create a future disaster risk. So many times the compromises that we do about the environmental concerns during disaster lead to future disasters or future disaster risk. And the fourth aspect, many of the tools that we already have in the environment domain, for example, environmental impact assessment, ecological risk assessment, the environmental audit, the health and safety risk assessment audit, and then the material and water audit, these kind of various tools, life cycle assessment, the ecological footprint, carbon footprint, many natural resource accounting. these have significant role to play in disaster risk reduction also. So now we have the new tools in sustainability like ESG, environmental and social governance auditing. So these kind of auditing, also the auditing of the green buildings, auditing of the green infrastructure, the ranking of the green cities. So I think these are also very important environmental tools and environmental parameters that also contributes in understanding disaster risk and vulnerability. Very interestingly, the Sendai framework, that is one of the 3 major global policies that we are in. India is a party to Sendai framework for DRR also for the period of 2015 to 30. Similarly, the same period, we are party to Sustainable Development Goal. We are also party for the same period for the Paris Climate Agreement. So very interestingly, it is the same period and we are the same government. We have to achieve. We have, and they say we are the same community, same people. We have to achieve. We have to strive to achieve the goals set under all the 3 protocols that we have signed. So that is also a important argument that we have to think of an integrated approach for achieving the goals set under these the 3 the global framework or global policies. The Sendai framework, very interestingly, in its preamble, I have just brought one sentence here. How it talks about this: promote the mainstreaming of disaster risk assessment into land use policy development. So land use in environmental and natural resource system, land use policy development and implementation, including urban planning. So it is talking about, again, the master planning, city planning, these kind of things. Then land degradation assessment, again, land, bringing land at the center, and informal and non-permanent housing. So it is talking about both kind of the housing, the housing sector, then the informal housing like slums, the urban villages, and non-permanent housing like a very, very temporary kind of housing or shelters, and the use of guidelines and follow-up tools informed by anticipated demographic and environmental changes. So demographic changes about the social settings, the demographic aspects like the different different sections in the community, society, men, women, children, elderly, disabled, these kind of things, gender, then environmental changes. So just one sentence of this preamble in the Sendai framework tells us that how the disasters, environment, and sustainability are interlinked. Just about disaster vulnerability of India, we have the more than 60% of the landmass of India prone to earthquake. We have 7,500 kilometers, the coastal area, coastline, that includes the islands as well. We have more than 40 million hectares directly affected by the riverine floods. And this does not include the urban floods or the mountain floods. Mountain floods, all the mountain areas, urban floods, almost all the cities are now affected. So basically these things. Please tell me about the time, how much time I have, so that I can work out that. So this is telling about the exposure to landslides also, floods also, cyclones also. So this I already discussed that how the environment and disasters have linkages, but this discourse is not new. We published a paper where the concept of preventive disaster management was they advocated, and that was published in Current Science in 2004, where we discussed that sustainability concerns and the environment concerns should be integrated with disaster management discourse. So other way also, when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about the business sustainability, even the corporate sustainability, now, in fact, after COVID, most of the corporate sustainability discourses have started considering disaster risk as a major impediment to the sustainability of the business as well. For example, if I say that industry requires water for cooling, and if the water resources is affected by the impact of climate change, how industry is going to sustain? Or if industry tries to sustain, there will be more and more conflict with the nearby community, which is drought prone, because it is the common water. And we still remember the certain industry cases in the West Bengal and other places, for example, the Coca-Cola factory and some the automobile, these kind of things where there are issues, there were issues related with these. So I think these are also the lessons that how we look at this sustainability of cities, how we look at the sustainability of the corporate systems. We are talking about the smart city, but the primary focus in smart city is that we should have a automated system, with digitalized system, and we should have a very, very proficient system of service delivery of services and goods. For example, we say that the water supply system should be very efficient. But see, despite of digitalization, despite of automation, in Delhi, we had to shut down the 3 power plant, water supply system plants. Why? There was a deluge. Similarly, we may also require to shut down the plants where there's no water. So basically, water management is a sustainability issue. The water governance is a sustainability issue. The effective integrated water management approach along with the land management approach is a sustainability issue. So disaster management, the story would not be complete if we do not talk about the sustainability concerns, and sustainability management would not be complete if we do not consider about the disaster and shock related aspects given by natural factors, the man-made factors, as well as the climatic factors. So basically, these are the kind of things that I wanted to bring. I will be just scrolling through some of the slides. Like I have just tried to show some examples where the disasters affected environment, like super cyclone, Amphan, even the recent cyclones also, the Biparjoy, the Taute, all have affected the ecosystems to a great way. Even the chemical accidents like the gas explosion, Visakhapatnam gas leak. This is showing that how the biodiversity, the hotspots, like the biodiversity park, the protected areas were affected in West Bengal and Odisha by the cyclone Amphan. These are the kind of damages on ecosystems. So how sustainability is compromised, how sustainability is also put in question by various kind of disasters. Now, the locust attack was also there 2 years back, and that has affected a lot of biodiversity systems in Rajasthan and many other nearby these things. If we look at the kind of the root of locust attack, we find that that also has a direct climate connectivity, and it has affected not only the agro biodiversity, it has affected the forest biodiversity natural park also. Now we see that each and every disaster, I just put some examples of 2020 only, 3 months or 4 months, and see each and every major disaster that was taking place is affecting our water bodies. This year also, it is affecting our water bodies. The flood will be over in Delhi, flood will be over in the Himalayan areas, but many of the water bodies are getting vanished, filled with silt, filled with garbage during this period. Are we really able to desilt those areas? Because that requires huge money, that requires huge resources, and many times we are deficient of the resources. So this shows that how water body is affected by this chemical gas leak in Assam, this Assam floods, then wildfires. This picture tells that how it is affecting the huge biodiversity ecosystem services, and that has a lot of linkages. The wildfires and forest fire are also connected with health, because a lot of smoke is there, and smoke aggravates asthma and other things. Would not be going into detail. We also have now globally the EcoDRR as one of the established discipline, ecosystem approach to disaster risk management. In other terms, we call it a nature-based solutions. And now even the coalition of disaster resilient infrastructure, CDRI, is also focusing on nature-based solutions. That how do we invest in nature? How do we invest in sustainability to reduce the risk of disaster? So these kind of things are also there. Then some kind of a publications I'll be scrolling, like ecosystem services of a wetland in Delhi. And then some of the publications are also there, like these kind of articles. You see that how land use, land related challenges are there. I will be skipping some of the slides. I would not be going to detail because we have the time limits. This session has to be completed. So there are some publications available on my website. If any participants are interested, they can look at this. That includes a district level handbook also on disaster risk reduction, that also talks that how we integrate the ecosystem services into that. Then Prime Minister's 10-point agenda, and item 1 and item 8, which is related with local capacities and the sectoral dimensions of disaster management. Basically, that also talks that how do we integrate the sustainability SDG related issues into disaster management. Then how each department imbibes the principles of disaster management. This Gorakhpur model is there. Then how do we look at the peri-urban ecosystems and sustainability for DRR? This is a publication jointly with the Rockefeller Foundation. This is a compendium of case studies for Government of Maharashtra that is talking about the drought areas, urban areas, flood areas, and coastal areas. Then how children are affected by these kind of challenges, climatic challenges, disasters, and how ecosystems play a great role. for their sustainability and resilience. So these kind of publications, like one compendium of Asia Pacific region on nature-based solutions for resilient ecosystems and society has also been published. And there are now the final slide. Basically, when we talk about the sustainability, disaster risk reduction, and climate change, basically we should also ask one question to ourselves. We are talking about development. What is development basically? Let us think about development. Just close your eyes for a few minutes and think what is development. When you are alone, just try to think. And you will find that development itself is a question, because no dictionary has yet defined development. There's a definition of economic development. There is a definition of sustainable development, but what is development? So let us first think that what kind of development really we want. And this is the answer. Basically, a kind of a balance, a kind of a middle path. We need materialistic growth, we need economic growth, but at the same time, we need to take care of the greening the system. We need to take care of the ecological system, and that will help us reduce the risk of disaster. That will help us in reduce the impact of climate change, and that will help us attain a long-term sustainability. By that we will be able to give a better future to our next generation. And the next generation partly is already here, which is looking at how do we give our resources to them. So thank you very much for inviting me for this discussion. And if there are any questions, I am here, or I can be contacted later also for any kind of discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. Arjunji, and all the team of IMPRI for inviting me for this talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an insightful and thought-provoking session. Now I request the chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel, to share her remarks.
Yeah, I think Professor Anil K. Gupta has made a very, very valuable and very comprehensive, scientifically robust presentation with so many important examples. And I think he also talked about the social cost benefit analysis. Yes, we need development and people want connectivity, physical infrastructure becomes very important. But at the same time, what happens to the people who are on that? So I think we need to be this complex relationship between development and sustainability and the people's living condition, habitat, that is a very important dilemma that we are facing in the 21st century. And I think there are so many learnings, because there are learnings from IMPRI and learnings from various state governments at the subnational level. Lot is happening, like Maharashtra, the first state to come up with a very comprehensive climate change policy, and also a stake of like women's stake in that, because women closely, they have a symbiotic relationship with Mother Nature, and even subsistence production, food security, all of them are linked to that. So I think, and the institute, his institute is doing a great job by organizing the training programs, very comprehensive training programs for the youth. And we have taken part in it for several of them, and all over India, like people are looking forward to this kind of training program. And that's why you have more than 700, 800 participants registering for the course. And I also have been responsible for promoting so many of such courses and discussing with the principals. And also, I think it's a very important discussion we had today on environmental issues. And I think it has given us major food for thought. And wherever we are in our local reality also, how can we intervene? Once we are equipped with this knowledge and the long-term perspective, it becomes very important to take action, to stick out our neck, to amplify the voices of the local communities. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I request Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam to share her remarks as well.
Thank you. It's a very wonderful, very comprehensive presentation about the disaster management. But just one thing, as policymakers, as lawyers, as researchers, as students, what is the your final message to all of us? What can we do to ensure to have a kind of maybe knowledge about disaster, or maybe what can we do to prevent something, or can we play a role as citizens also?
So very precisely what I would say, that we are witnessing increasing frequency and intensity of disasters, all kind of. whether it is contributed by nature or whether it is the anthropogenic, whether our own mistakes, the mistakes at planning level or implementation level. But for its remedy, it requires a mission mode approach where everyone will have to contribute. And how everyone contributes, there are many ways. One is that, and here we have a lot of youth and other members, we have a lot of academic people, and we have a lot of policy people. Basically, if we start looking at small case studies, we start emphasizing that how things are contributing to disaster risk and how things can contribute to reducing disaster risk. And I think that will help us in a better advocacy, because if we really want to do advocacy and we want to bring change in our planning regime at local level, we have to come up with solid examples, basically. Otherwise, people don't listen, because people think that whatever we are talking, maybe in principle it is okay, conceptually it is okay, but those are not of immediate result. So basically, if we start identifying good examples and start advocacy based on that, so some or other day, these people whom we start blaming or who we keep on blaming, basically we have to change them and we have to bring them on the mainstream with us. And when they start understanding, I think the situation will change. So let us be optimistic, let us work together. And I look at the young generation also, and certainly there will be better change for a better future, better India, and will be as we are emerging as a leadership, not only in the area of disaster risk management, but also in the area of sustainability and adaptation as well. So thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The floor is now open for questions from the audience. If anyone has questions, kindly raise your hand.
Or we can wrap it up also. Nikita, do you have any question?
Yes, sir, I would like to ask a question.
Please, briefly. Yeah.
So firstly, as we know that the state of Assam witnesses floods almost every year. So what is the reason behind that we are not able to tackle it? And why are we witnessing these floods every year? And secondly, the first slide that you showed about the ecological footprint and the happiness index. So if the ecological footprint is higher, then the environment is more degraded in that country, and hence it affects our physical health. So it kind of reduces our happiness. So in the happiness index, in that sense,
I got your point. I got your point.
Isn't it flawed in that sense?
See, if you study economics, basically, you'll find that we have to exploit environment for our sustenance and happiness, and we do that. But if you look at a concept that is called Kuznets curve, I missed to bring that here. If you just search anywhere in Google, basically, you keep on exploiting environment and your prosperity increases. This is the general thought process. मैं ज़्यादा खेती करूँगा और ज़्यादा पेड़ काटूँगा, मुझे पैसा मिलेगा. But actually, this is not a linear this thing. At some stage, it becomes stationary, and after that, it becomes comes to a lag phase. And basically, if we look at the global, पूरी दुनिया में अगर आप देखेंगे, the entire world, if you see that there is a economic recession going on, and that is इसीलिए लोग आपस में झगड़े करते रहते हैं, क्योंकि there is huge competition. The growth rate is not increasing. Almost 2 decades, despite of the best technological advancement. आज की डेट में 20 साल पहले जो कोई मोबाइल फोन नहीं लेके चलता था, अभी सब we have nanotechnology, we have robotics, we have drones around us. Best technological advancement is there, फिर भी economic growth नहीं हो रही है. तो कहाँ पे problem है? The problem is related with ecological slowdown, because our bioproductivity and ecological productivity is going down. So we have, and now economists have also realized that the economic sustainability is possible only with the ecological sustainability, because we are getting food, water, many things from ecosystems only. So this thought process that we can exploit the environment unlimited, that has to be changed. Basically, we have to start giving back, basically. And that is the reason circular economy is being promoted globally. We have to start talking about the zero discharge cities. कि हम कोई भी water discharge करेंगे ही नहीं. There is no waste. We have started talking about the zero waste city. Waste होता ही नहीं कुछ भी. It is our inability to consider its value. That is the reason we throw it. So basically that kind of a new economy, that we call it green economy, the new economy that we call it circular economy, that is now taking place. दूसरी बात आपने बोली floods के बारे में, particularly Assam floods. Then I have a question. Is flood a disaster? Is flood a bad thing? If you study geography, if you study environment, even in the history, you find that most of the civilizations have gone along with floods, along with rivers. So floods are basically the natural factors, natural process. What we have done, we have entered into the flood zone and we curse the floods. Basically, if there are no floods, there won't be any food. The floodplains provides us food. So basically, we have to work on reducing this conflict. And more we can work on reducing this conflict, we will be relatively more safer. So that is the thing. Then whatever happens in Arunachal are the upper reaches. When we do any kind of a land changes in the landscape, when we construct a road, we do a lot of cutting. All the silt comes and fills our rivers and tributaries in Assam that are coming to Assam. So basically that upstream, downstream relationship, the ill impacts of development. So how do we look at this? I think that is very important. So it requires a holistic understanding. And that is the reason I say that sustainability and environmental issues are implicit to managing disaster risk. Preparedness is fine. You can prepare that, okay, the person is dying, person is going to getting drowned. You have to save the life. You have to have best preparedness. You have to have best maps available. You have to have the rescuers available. You save life. But that is the last solution. The primary solution has to be reducing the risk. So like if you look at the earlier housing in the upper reaches of Assam, those were the bamboo houses. Even if the flash floods are there, people were not getting affected. Now we are making pakka houses on the Tarai areas, near the rivers. So that is certain to happen. The river claims its course some other time, and the river like Brahmaputra is historically that kind of river. It can swell, it can take a form of disastrous this thing. It is historically known. But we are entering into that. Many times we try to create a dike or embankment. Can Brahmaputra be controlled by a dike? Can Brahmaputra, such huge hydro energy is there? But we do that. So basically, we have to work on reducing the conflict. And that is the reason now we are talking of adaptation. We adapt with that. So any kind of such ports, when we make adjustment with that, so that it is also there and we are also there. So basically, we have to start living with the risk. So that approach is very much needed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. One last question I would also like to all of us to think. So time and again, as you also mentioned, that disaster, flood, or there is heat wave, then there is air pollution in cities. We keep on dwelling into such issues in past, in future also we do. Sir, and you also mentioned about the young generation. Sir, what do you see in Delhi? Also now school are closed. In Assam, all over our researchers are there. Everyone's life is affected. So how do you see our younger generation, children in school, how they will be equipped with knowledge or awareness to tackle this more proactively than our generation have? What are your suggestions for that? Maybe we can do some training program for school children also.
Certainly we can do an awareness program, a short program, we can do that. And just one line or two line answer to this for our younger generation. Basically, now everyone recognizes that this is not a natural disaster. Now, most disasters are now, in fact, man-made disasters. Man means men, women, both. But I also say that women never make disasters. Only men can make disasters. So a lighter side of this. But anyway, anthropogenic aspects are always very important in making these things a disaster. Now, increasing landslides are side effect of development. We all know that. So basically, we have to start anticipating better. The risk, many times the risk is unavoidable, risk is there. So heavy rainfall, we can't do anything. But if we have better anticipation of rainfall, and then our behavior and conduct according to that, and not only a short-term basis that kal barish ho raha hai, aaj pata chal gaya, ye baat nahi hai. When our climate forecast is, climate projections are telling ki next 10 years mein barish aisa ho jayega, next 20 years mein aisa ho jayega, then why don't you construct our infrastructure considering that 30-year scenario, 40-year scenario, 50-year scenario? We are not building a house for 1 year or 2 years time. We are building a house for 50 years, 100 years time. We are building a dam for 150 years. We are building an airport for 100 years or 150 years. So basically, we have to integrate these factors. And what children can do, children can take small projects. They can talk to their parents. They can talk to their teachers. That हमारा campus कैसे resilient हो, और हमारा घर से they from home to school, what are the aspects that can provide resilience? You start talking on this, and in fact, a big discourse will start automatically. That why our school building got flooded, what can be done so that at least part of the school building or school campus becomes flood resilient. Even these kind of examples, you can draw a sketch, you can tell to your teacher, you can tell to your principal, you can tell, have discourses. So I think that will start some kind of a discussion. Even your own house, is your house resilient? Is your house, what could have been done? Or when your family is going to buy a new house, at least you can put that aspect. Okay. We will better stay in a smaller house, but it should be disaster resilient. So I think these are some the small things you can take initiative. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening our gathering today. We appreciate your valuable contribution and guidance. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So I'll be leaving. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll move to the next session for the day. I would request Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam to commence the interactive session. Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, Visiting Senior Fellow IMPRI, Advocate, Author and Researcher, Gender and Human Rights. Welcome, ma'am, and over to you.
Yeah, so this is an interactive session, and as we have spoken earlier, that we will talk about capital punishment and should it be abolished or should we retain it. So last time 2 participants have agreed, but I don't see them here. But we have David who will be talking. So, David, will you what position will you take? Are you in favor of death penalty or you are against capital punishment?
Right. Am I audible?
You're audible. Garvit, you can also have your camera on.
Right.
Charuji got COVID, so Garvit is filling in. But we don't have Mohammed Ji from Pakistan who had to argue against. But why not, Shalu ma'am, you take that stance and I will assist Garvit for his arguments.
Sure.
So let us start the session with Chair's remark for to set the context, and then ma'am, you can decide how shall we go forward for pehle.
Yeah, I think this has a very, very hotly debated issue world over, because in the 21st century civilized world, can we have this idea of death penalty, even when it comes to the worst form of terrorism? Can the state take the role of this? Can you have that kind of state? State is mighty. If individuals are doing certain crimes, then do we have right? And second argument is that why just end it with killing a person, or instead, why don't you make that person realize what wrong they have done? No, so that is also another argument which is posed by the human rights activists, that if that person is imprisoned for life, like he'll be reminded every day that what he had done is wrong. But my main this thing against capital punishment is that all democratic minded nation states have abandoned it. Okay, and they are more talking about this instead of retributive justice. Everyone is talking about restorative justice. So that is there. But I think it is a very, very complex issue, especially when you get the details of extremely gory crimes like Nirbhaya tragedy and all, and you can see even the human rights lawyers and all, they said that if you don't punish them by ending their life, they will commit more such heinous crimes. So that argument is also there in certain parts of the world, that if you allow such destructive people to be on this earth, they will do more destruction. But I think main thing is that those who believe in human rights and who believe in civil liberties, who believe in sanctity of an individual, state doesn't have a right to take the life. State is there always to assist the people, to protect the citizens. So when you talk about capital punishment, it is institutionalization of murder by the state. That's the argument, and also there's the philosophy that goes by it. It was happening in the medieval Europe, it was happening in the medieval time, during the feudalism, where the king and the state had that kind of a role. But can we have it in a society which is talking about human rights and democracy and expression, and also the more humane way of treating fellow human beings? No. So that comes here are the two approaches that we have, and let us debate
them. Ma'am, who will go first? Please decide for or against. That is the contention.
For.
Okay, Garvit, go ahead. All the best.
Right. Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes.
So I'll just start off. So first off, when arguing for death penalty, it is to ensure that death penalty should only be afforded in certain severe cases, crimes, which can be listed in this session, but it's not really required, as we're all aware of the murder, rape, mass murder, conspiracy, and so on and so forth. But these crimes should not always include crimes like treason and mutiny, which are also at risk of political influence and manipulation, where the political influence may lead to a sort of a biased verdict in these cases. But going back to the main case, is that there's a certain responsibility that the state holds to everyone in the society. But after certain actions, it can be said not as a retributive position, but as a deterrent position, to ensure that the capital punishment is actually important for the state to carry out to ensure that the cohesion of society is maintained. But before that, which benchmarks should be met to decide which cases should be considered for that penalty? These following benchmarks were some benchmarks I found in my arguments and papers, which were required to ensure that death penalty is not measured out just randomly. A, some sort of visible lack of regret on the part of the accused, along with a certain intent behind their crimes, say evidence of planning conspiracy. Because once this is ascertained, all responsibility which we could take away from the accused is dissolved, as we can see that the accused, the criminal, has carried out certain crimes with complete mental capacity and intention to cause severe harm to society and its citizens. This is important to ensure that each individual is held responsible for their own actions properly. A simple ethical rule to ensure proper accountability is to ensure that an individual's power or capacity to act or affect in a situation be balanced with proportional responsibility. Say, in cases of childhood trauma, mental illness, and so on and so forth, say poverty, we can say that the individual's power or capacity to act is restricted. Thus, punishing them with a death penalty would put a disproportionate amount of responsibility upon them. Say, young people or people who are suffering from neglect may have low responsibility in certain cases, and hence on them, death penalty should not be put. But there are certain circumstances which will override these sort of responsibilities. In the sense, the past circumstances, they can be overridden by future considerations of the future generations in society. Say, if someone has committed a crime right now, the primary case here is based on deterrence. In the future, if these individuals are allowed to stay in society, they may harm society and its constituents due to their existing intention that has been established that they wish to harm society or citizens, and they may have the capability to inflict further harm on someone. Second, one thing that we often not notice is that the prison inmates themselves have some rights which we must give to them. And allowing certain citizens to allowing certain criminals who have committed heinous crimes to stay with the fellow prison inmates and prison employees is also a harm to them. Hence, death penalty on some level prevents both general society and prison to be safe from the criminals. On that level, we can talk about one second responsibility is that once certain heinous acts are committed by individuals, they require some condemnation and appropriate punishment. Their actions in a way suspend the implicit social contract between us as citizens, which bond us together, and weakens the political recognition that is offered to these citizens. In these cases, it is ethical for the court to extend the protection and responsibility first to the welfare of other citizens over the criminals accused. This is not to say that all murderers or criminals should be executed like this, but it is always important to keep the possibility of death penalty open to punish, well, say the accused of Nirbhaya, because obviously they may have an harm to themselves, to others outside, and to those in the prison. Along with that, deterrence isn't just protection from acceptance from the criminal's actions itself. There's also protection from an acceptance of the criminal's actions. If certain acts are left unpunished, they may lead to further damage to society, as individuals may feel emboldened to underestimate law and the state. But this is a smaller problem. The larger problem is a loss in public trust and legitimacy of the state. If such a loss in public trust and legitimacy is allowed to be carried out, this may further harm the function of society. Because of certain elements of society constantly undermine and doubt the state over and over again, the government will be at consistent pressure and threat from society itself that it wishes to protect. So deterrence from death penalty may not be the best solution, in the sense that it may not be the worst punishment of the, I'm sorry, my apologies. Deterrence from death penalty may not be the best solution outright, but the fear of death, the end of all future hopes and aspirations of an individual, may still provide some emotional or threatening deterrent to individuals and society. Furthermore, my apologies, there's a certain problem of misconvictions and the irreversibility of death penalty that comes up in these debates. Is that, first off, the problem of judicial error or inefficiency is a very serious one. We may accidentally convict someone that is, well, not entirely guilty or may not be guilty. That is a serious problem. But that, in that case, we should ensure that the fear of wrong judgment does not prohibit the legal system from meting out punishment. Because of such fear of wrong judgment is allowed to exist, this may just lead to an erosion of trust in the system once again. Because if it cannot self-regulate and keep itself free of these misconvictions and errors, then it might as well be argued in society one day that the legal system should be demolished. So by the fear of wrong judgment, if we start reducing punishment or preventing punishment, the consequences of it are just unthinkable. But rhetoric aside, the main fear with respect to death penalty is its irreversibility. We can't bring back the dead is like the main reason given. I mean, life imprisonment is also not that different. It is utterly irreversible. Like once you imprison someone, you can't bring their own life back. You can not bring back the trauma and the pain and the further losses that will be done to them. They all survive inhumane conditions, go through all sorts of psychological, emotional, and physical harm. That harm cannot be reversed either. I'm not saying life imprisonment is as the same as death, but when we privilege death to be so significantly worse than life imprisonment, we just ignore the sort of pragmatic justifications that death penalty has. Because death penalty, as at the end of the day, is not should not be treated as a taboo. It should be treated as a merely a pragmatic tool to prevent direct future harm from these criminals and B, act as a deterrent through fear. Because on some level, society needs some sort of law and order. Society needs stability. And as of this moment, the state is the primary source of that stability, along with civil society and other aspects of society which we may consider. That's it. I rest my case.
Thank you. Since I'm assisting Garvit and as chair mentioned, so I would also like to submit for the death penalty. As chair has already mentioned that many of the developed countries are going in that direction. Their prison system, their correction system is very strong. In India, we know the state of affairs. Even we see criminal cases or even threatening Bollywood that is happening from most of the well-known jails. So we know the criminal system in our country, and we are still a developing country. A large part of our hinterland is very poor, rural. So if we are not giving that message, so especially with our judicial system, the alternate message which is going is really not supportive toward having a fair society, so that all the participants get in. There are causes of women, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, other marginalized groups, which will get affected if we'll not have such deterrent or such kind of system, so that the real message goes, and that is in the interest of the society. So I will also submit here. I will also encourage any of the participants, if they want to say anything in favor for death penalty. Animesh ji, Chayak ji, Sanket ji, Sejal, Sulekha, Vivek ji, you can raise hand. Now, I would invite Shalu ji.
Yes, sure. So maybe like I can just share my screen.
Please go ahead.
It was very, very nice presentation by Sejal, sorry, Garvit. I applaud you for that. You have put your points very nicely. And so I will start with, this Faiz Ahmed Faiz, his poem about, Subha-e Azadi, like, the dawn of freedom. And I'll start with this. And he was writing this poem in the context of, the partition of India. When we get freedom, this time, like, at that point of time, there was also partition. There was pain of partition. So he has written this poem in that context, and he is questioning, what kind of freedom are we getting? So you can read that poem later on. But about the capital punishment, kind of situation which is there is that most of the countries, like retentionists, are those who are in favor of death penalty, and these countries have retained death penalties, and this include United States, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, and also capital punishment is being carried out right now in China, India, and Middle East countries. So according to Amnesty International, 18 countries have performed execution in 2020, and in 2022, at least 831 executions were conducted in 16 countries. And Iran has hanged the highest number of people, that is 596, and it includes 15 women. Saudi Arabia beheaded 145 men and 1 woman, Kuwait hanged 2 women for murders, Bangladesh hanged 4 men for murder, and USA executed 18 men. And Singapore has executed 11 for drug trafficking. So women account for less than 1% of all executions carried out worldwide. So even the women are being even if it is very less percentage, so women are being given death penalties. So advocate of death penalty generally in terms of, if you consider the academic and the other kind of discussions, they say that is crime. It is a good tool for police and prosecutors. It makes sure that the convicted criminals do not offend again, and it protects the society from criminals, as Garvit has already said. And it ensures that the justice for crimes, for grievous crimes, should be there. Like the retribution should be there. The punishment must be painful in proportion to the crime, as we have heard. So especially in case of heinous crimes such as murder, terrorism. So Garvit, you're like all these philosophers, they agree with you, and they say that citizens should be made responsible for his act. And like in the 18th century, like this discussion has been going on for quite for centuries. So in the 18th century, there was a philosopher who said that every murderer deserves to die on the grounds that loss of life is incomparable to any penalty that allow them to remain alive, including life imprisonment. Then John Stuart Mill, and he explained that the capital punishment should not be abolished. He said that it is reasonable because if we are fining a person, then also we are not taking his property. So, this is the kind of argument he takes. But when we talk about the other side, the abolitionists, they say that retribution is simply a revenge and cannot be condoned. In modern times, it is considered as a primitive form of justice. Death penalty is state-sanctioned practice of killing of a person as a punishment for crime. And these arguments believe that capital punishment is a worst form of violation of human rights, because right to life is most important, and capital punishment violates it, and it is irreversible. Like, once a person dies, you cannot bring him back. So even if it is brutal and it lacks deterrent effect. And human rights activists, they say that it is a cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishment, and it leads to miscarriage of justice, because sometimes wrongful execution of innocent persons are being carried out. And in USA, there was a study which was being conducted which says that once after the test and the evidences, they reconsidered, and they found that around 3% of people only were found guilty. So that kind of studies have also been conducted. Sometimes it has been said that because of improper procedures, unfair executions, may be resulted. So opponents argue that this punishment is being used more often against the people from the racial and ethnic minorities and people from lower socioeconomic background, because they could not hire good lawyers, and they could not argue their case in the courts. So they end up getting harsher punishment. Whereas if you compare compared to rich people, they can hire lawyers, and they can invest all kind of resources, and they can easily escape the punishment. So the background of the victim influence the outcome. Amnesty International and various other organizations, they have said that it is a breach of human rights. It's right to life and right to live free from torture is a kind of basic right, and that cannot be taken by the state. The state has duty to protect the human rights of every individual. So if we talk about Indian situation, we have to consider what is the purpose of death penalty. How has it reduced the rate of crime against women? We have seen in the case of Nirbhaya, all those people were hanged, but it has not affected the rate of crime. Experience show that the death penalty has not improved any, neither it has decreased the crime. The National Crime Record Bureau report shows that around 129 persons have been awarded the death sentence every year, but the crime has not been. The rate of crime is still going on high, and it may be a response to an outrage, anxiety, or anger, but it's not seen as a solution to reduce crime. The law is being weaponized and used to target the weaker sections, the minorities, or the marginalized sections. The data from prison, that is important, because if you really consider that the data from the research, you can do a small research, anybody can do that. Go to the prison website and you will find the data of prisoners, number of men, number of women, their caste, their background, their education qualification, everything is available. And you can just see from that most of the prisoners and under trials, they are from poor and marginalized sections who cannot afford legal services. Though we have a provision for providing free legal aid, but in some cases we have seen that even those legal services are not of good quality, and therefore the prisoners have suffered, their rights are being impaired. So, and the criminal justice system also exhibit the biases that exist in our society. The voices of victims and witnesses are being silenced, as we have seen in right now it's going on many of the cases which are coming to limelight. You can talk about Lakhimpur Kheri violence. You can talk about the Restless case, how the voices of victims and witnesses are being silenced by the powerful accused persons. Then the other factor is that if you talk about the POCSO Act, the National Crime Record Bureau data shows that 95% of crimes are committed by the people who are known to the victim. So if one is talking about the harsh punishment in sexual assault cases, the family is being pressurized or victims are being threatened to not to report the matter or withdraw the matter. This is the basic, experience of women's movement, the people who are working with the victims of rape and sexual assault. So we have also seen that the harsher or severe punishment will result in situations where the accused may end up murdering the victims so that she will not be in position to report the crime. But this is also one of the kind of experience which has come to the limelight, that right now what is happening is that the victims are being murdered. So so that they couldn't complain, they couldn't say that this person has raped me or that those kind of things. So the conviction rate in rape cases is as low as 27%. So we need to increase this rate of arrest and rate of conviction. We have seen that judges sympathize with the culprits and acquit them on flimsy ground. We have already discussed some of the cases earlier. Powerful men who commit crime deploy all resources and connection and their positions to influence investigation. The reliance on death penalty divert attention from problems such as the problems of the weaker justice system, such as access to justice, which is difficult for many poor. Many women are not being able to access justice. And there is a huge pendency of cases. Some of the cases take years and decades to come to the conclusion. Then investigation is not effective. So it's basically sometimes wrong people are being targeted, and sometimes poor people are being put behind the bars, and the criminals escape during the entire process. So the kind of investigation system we have, it's not very effective. Then the rights of victims are completely neglected. So in our adversary system of justice, we know that victims are not given, victims' rights are limited. So that is another factor, which is there. So so what we, the women's movement and the human rights movements, what they are suggesting is that the focus should be laid on restorative and rehabilitative aspect of justice rather than retribution. And if we talk about the legal aspect, what is happening within the courts? In 1980, the Supreme Court in Bachchan Singh case, they have evolved the principle of rarest of rare case. That means that death penalty could only be awarded in the cases which are, which comes under this category of rarest of rare case. So Justice Bhagwati, he has said that death penalty is discriminatory because it is against the poorer section of the community. It is arbitrary and unconstitutional as it violates Article 21 of the Constitution. So even if you analyze the judgments in the rarest of rare case, you will see that there is no consensus among judges in case as to who should be hanged and who should not be. And if you analyze the data between 2000 and 2015, 30% of death penalties awarded by the trial courts ended up in acquittals, where when the decision is challenged in the higher courts, and if the decision again is challenged in the Supreme Court, then it comes only to 5%. Also, the Supreme Court, in one of the cases, they have said that there are two different standards, because in our legal system, one of the right of the accused is that if somebody is, the decision is being made and that the person should be hanged, and the Supreme Court confirms that the person should be hanged, that person can apply to the president for clemency, for it's called mercy petitions. So the president and the executive come into picture, and the president and executive, they can grant leniency, they can show their leniency, and they can say that, okay, this person shouldn't be hanged. So in considering that aspect, they have said that judiciary and executive follow two different principles. So when the judge, the judiciary is following the rarest of rare case principle, and again, which is based on subjective interpretation of the judges, the principles followed by executive, in granting clemency, that is not known. So again, it is a subjective bias which is coming in, that who should be granted death penalty, clemency, and what should be done. Justice Verma Committee, they have recommended against death penalty. The Law Commission, the report in 2015, it says that death penalty does not serve any purpose. And in many cases, the courts are granting the life imprisonment for whole life in very serious crimes, which may, which may range around 30 to 60 years on an average. So, instead of if the person has committed very serious crime, such as rape, murder, or whatever, in that case, that person could be imprisoned for the entire life. Right now, they say it may be 20 years or 10 years, but it could be extended up to whole life. So that could be one of the alternatives which is emerging. And but the system has to be geared towards victims and survivors, and that is a major demand of the women's movement also, that we need victim or survivor centric justice system, and we have to identify victim the plans for rehabilitation of victims, the safety plans, and the kind of culture that should be changed. And the justice should be done effectively and efficiently. So, but ensuring this, what we further need is that ensuring the certainty of punishment, and that is important. And the person who has committed the crime, that person should be certainly punished. We have to fix the accountability of the violent men, and we could create fast-track courts which provide quality justice, and we have to find ways so that the rich and affluent, they shouldn't escape the clutches of law. We should have proper witness and victim protection programs in place, and we need to make fundamental structural changes within the court and within the society to eliminate the culture of rape and violence. So these are the kind of, I think, changes we can think of. And this is former UN Secretary General. He was talking about that, the right to life is a foundation of all human rights. Taking of life is irreversible and goes against our fundamental belief in the dignity and worth of human being. So he's advocating for, against the death penalty. So with this, I'll stop sharing my presentation, and we can have further questions. And so Garvit, if anything you want to add.
Not much, but I will just mention one thing.
Right.
From what I might like, okay, maybe really mostly judgment death penalty are based on retribution. But I think from what I recall, I was advocating for not a retribution, but more grounds. Strengths on the ground. Second ground was reservation of the state is not from Imam 16 term idealist, but it's from Hegel, 18th century philosopher. And that's what I was advocating for. So what do you feel about death penalty as a last resort option, which can be required to ensure faith in the state's legitimacy? Because from what I can understand, if we keep it a last measure resort, all the cases of restorative justice, rehabilitative measures, better justice system coexist with death penalty. Because I don't think that's possible in my case. But if we ensure that the fear exists and the restorative systems exist, I there's a retribution reservation in society. That's
Yeah, so retribution, like you are saying that the criminal justice system should be reformed. Yeah, surely, like Supreme Court agrees with you, and therefore they have come out with this principle of rarest of rare case. So therefore they are saying that okay, death penalty is it can be granted in case of very heinous crime in which, according to the judge, that should be the rarest of rare case. So this is a principle we are following in India. And of course, there are human rights and women's organizations who are against it, and there are people who are in favor of it. So we have, we are still debating on this issue, and maybe we have to take this debate further. So it's not, ending here, but we can continue to debate because I think the time is also like exceeding. So I think I should stop here. And Professor Patel would like to add something.
Yeah, I think at a practical level, after 2013, if you see the cases of heinous crimes, most of the time, even whether it's a gang rape or this, they have killed the person. Earlier, we used to get person was raped and the punishment was 7.5 years to 10 years. But after the Nirbhaya tragedy, when all these boys were and men were hanged, you see that they don't want to keep any evidences. And this is the trajectory of all the countries where there is capital punishment. Just to destroy evidences, they also kill the victim. So it is not only sexual violence, but also sexual violence and murder. So that is the one thing. But on a principle level, one thing is that see, once you state gets the right to take away life, no, so it is like an expression of absolute power of the state. So individual versus state, when the mighty state is there, whether you talk about say you give examples of a mass murderer or serial murderers and all. Even in that case, it is a group of people, like even in case of terrorists, there are a group of people. But as against that, the mighty state, can you equate the power of that? And I think Dr. Shalu Nigam gave a very, very robust argument that most of the time it is people who are powerless, who have no access to legal services, and these are the ones who are caught. And those who are powerful, even after committing the crime, they manage to get out of the gallows. No, so I think the whole, in a society which is completely skewed in favor of the rich and mighty, or only handful of people who have a political power, economic power, and the cultural power, in that situation, this kind of a harsh punishment, it is the ultimate, like taking away the human life, isn't it going to perpetrate rule of injustice? No, so that is there. And another thing, that when we say that everyone has a right to life, no, is by the Constitution of India. So even the guilty people have right to life. So even if we consider, see, the campaign against torture, which says that torture is dehumanizing, then in that case, capital punish is the nothing but essence of dehumanization. So I agree with Dr. Shalu Nigam when she said that law has been weaponized against the poor. And in this kind of a situation where there is a day-to-day life also institutionalizes injustice, discrimination, and exclusion, capital punishment can have a very, very detrimental message and detrimental effect. In fact, those killers of Rajiv Gandhi, Mr. Former Prime Minister, when the statement was, when the family members, his wife and children, they pardoned the criminal because they were going to face gallows, no? And they had made appeal to the President of India. And I think Madam Sonia Gandhi and Mr. Rahul Gandhi and Priyanka Gandhi, they forgave the culprits, no, who were proved to be, there were all evidences that they were the ones who had killed them. And still they did it. I think it was a very important act of kindness, no? And I think that's what we want in this society when we talk about all the lofty goals of human dignity and sanctity of an individual and respect for human life and right to life. I think capital punishment should not be allowed by in any case, because it's the state cannot weaponize any law against the individual, howsoever heinous the crime is. It can be the life imprisonment and also reformative justice that I support. Yeah.
Thank you, Vibhuti ma'am, Shalu ma'am, and Mr. Garvit for the engaging and insightful discussion. I request with Professor Vibhuti Patel to give her closing remarks for the session.
Yeah. Today's, I think, sessions were very lively. And first a presentation by Advocate Lara Jesani on dilution of the environmental law, with so many examples of what kind of damage it is bringing to the ecosystem, to the habitat, to the rights of the people who are who are losing who are displaced and they are relocated and they are not given adequate compensation, and the series of disasters and damages that we have. That was a very eye-opening presentation. The second presentation by Dr. Anil Gupta was also very, very useful, where he talked about the social cost benefit analysis. We want development, we want more facilities and better quality of life, but at the same time, you have to pay the price. Now, where do we draw a line? No, that to what extent we need development, and the current experiences of pandemic and even pandemic coupled with climate emergencies that we saw in 2 years' time has also made us think about being very concrete in our local reality, because what Assam is facing may not be the problem of Rajasthan, where there is a water scarcity, or what megapolis are facing may not be the problem of a small town. So I think knowing the local, what he told that, which I fully endorse, that knowing the local reality, taking stand on it, and finding out what are the damaging influence and what are the facilitating influence of the developmental initiatives which are taken up. I think we as a citizens have to be very, very active, because it is basically, it is our life is at stake, our ecosystem is at stake, our environment is at stake, and it affects. And we have seen in so many countries, like now environmental studies is not remained a bookish topic. It is the children who are asking the adults, no, as we saw the example of so many school children of Europe, and especially that Sweden has taken initiative where children are coming out in street and they are telling the adults that what kind of trajectory, developmental trajectory you are following, that it is not leaving any safe future for us. So I think the goal of sustainable development, what he talked about, that we should not consume, or we should not overexploit the natural resources in such a way that we don't leave anything for our future generations. So with that note, and I think we had a very important debate on capital punishment. And I think it's very important, because now India is also going into it, because it was only after the Nirbhaya tragedy that we had it. So as Dr. Shalu Nigam said, that you abolish capital punishment by law or by practice. So by practice, India had not. In fact, that person who was who retired, who had to perform this duty of executing a person, after that it had remained for many, many years. His services were not used, because by practice we had given up this thing. But now there is a increasingly there is a mood is created in such a way that those who perform heinous crime, they should be there. They should have no right to live, otherwise they'll create more damage. So I think these are some of the very mind-boggling issues which are debated by politicians and human rights organizations and civilians, and we must continue the debate so that we can arrive at a more humane solution, which is and also demand more for developmental investment. All these children who are entering into this crime, what kind of values they get, what kind of environment they are living in, and can we change what is the only source they have of doing what to do and what not to do in their life. It's just the pornography or the crime that are daily petty crimes that are happening around them. Can we change their lived reality? So I think in that direction we have to make our efforts, and I think that's the goal of this course also. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. With the chair's permission, we can go for the vote of thanks.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
As we have come to the end of day 14 of Law and Public Policy Youth Fellowship, an online national summer school program, a 2-month online immersive legal awareness and action research certificate training course, and internship program, I, Nikita Bhardwaj, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, New Delhi. We are grateful to our expert for the day 14 session, Advocate Lara Jesani, Professor Anil K. Gupta, and Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, for taking out their valuable time and giving us an opportunity to learn from this online certificate program. We thank our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel, and lead advisor, Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, for convening the session. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you tomorrow, that is 15th July at 11:30 a.m. for our day 15th of the certification course by distinguished experts, Justice Ajit K. Singh and Mr. Himanshu Shekhar. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI #Web Policy Talk and #Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.